Effort is a necessary baseline, yes, but it is fundamentally not the engine of quality.
So the engine is feedback. The central thesis running through all our sources today is just crystal clear on this. Effort doesn't produce quality. Engineered feedback does.
I really appreciate that focus because it immediately flips the script. It means quality isn't about working harder, it's about working smarter by designing better information systems. Systems that ruthlessly inject reality into the process.
That's the word, ruthless. And our sources today are fantastic because they draw lessons from places that seem, on the surface, totally disconnected.
They really do. We're going from the pressure cooker of Pixar's animation studio to, the intensive care units of leading hospitals?
And the global factory floor of Toyota. It's an incredible range.
It really is.
And so our mission today is to do a deep dive into how these incredibly successful organizations, they don't just passively ask for feedback.
Right. They don't put out an anonymous survey and just hope for the best.
Not at all. Instead, they engineer a repeatable, high-speed, and structurally safe system for delivering reality. So what we're looking at is how to build what we're calling a truth pipeline.
A truth pipeline. I like that.
It's a structure that ensures crucial, honest, and sometimes, frankly, painful information lands early enough to matter. Before it's too late to change course and the mistake is already baked into the final product.
So when we talk about engineering a true feedback loop, a mechanism that actually improves performance, what are the non-negotiables? What does the source material tell us is required to make a feedback system actually work and not just be, performative?
Well, based on a really detailed analysis of these high-reliability organizations, a system only really qualifies as a true feedback loop if it can do three very difficult things at the same time.
Okay.
First, it has to create a truthful signal. And this means overcoming massive cultural inertia, hierarchy, ego, all of it, to deliver objective reality, not just, pleasing anecdotes or polite, vague approval.
And that's where most of them fail, right?
Yeah.
Right there.
That's where most fail. The cultural barriers are always the hardest to break down. The second requirement is speed. It has to deliver that signal while you can still act. Information that arrives after the budget is spent, or the deadline has passed, or, the defect is shipped. It's useless.
It's just an autopsy at that point.
It's an autopsy, exactly. You need that truth to land right at the point of iteration when the fixes are cheapest. It's about timing, not just the content.
And the final piece, the loop part of the loop.
Right. The third, and this is the one that's so often forgotten, is that it must tune the signal into the next iteration. A loop has to close. If truth arrives, even painful objective truth, and nothing changes in the process or the structure or the standard.
And what was the point?
What was the point? The information was just trivia. It was learning that went absolutely nowhere. The organization consumed the information, but it failed to process it and, apply it.
That makes the relevance for you, the listener, just huge. Whether you're prepping for a crucial product launch, managing a sprawling team, or just trying to navigate a field that is drowning you in information overload, you need a reliable shortcut to better decisions.
And that's what we're going to show you. 5 distinct, powerful ways that organizations build candor, transparency, and objective truth right into their operational DNA. And this ensures that feedback is really the foundation of their success.
So where do we start?
Let's start with arguably one of the most famous examples of designing structural candor into the creative process, the Pixar Brain Trust.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in Point Richmond, California. It's the fall of 1998. And the film that was supposed to be Toy Story 2, it's in deep, deep trouble.
Deep trouble. They had years of work invested. The animation itself was beautiful. They had scenes, they had jokes. But in that dark screening room, the consensus was forming that the film was wobbling.
Wobbling. That's a great word for it.
It is. The accounts for people who were there describe the cut as having no pulse. The core emotional journey of Woody just wasn't working.
And this is the perfect illustration of what we talked about at the top. They were putting in incredible effort, literally working themselves ragged. But that effort alone wasn't generating quality. They were drifting.
They were drifting away from a coherent emotional core. And this is where their formalized ritual, the Brain Trust, acts as this crucial structural intervention. It's an almost flawless mechanism for getting past that polite, vague feedback that would kill a project this big.
I think it's really vital as you're listening and thinking about building your own truth pipeline to understand what the brain trust is not.
Yes, that's so important.
It's not a formal performance review of the director, and it's definitely not a standard notes meeting where the director just sits there paralyzed, waiting for the highest paid person in the room to speak first so everyone else can just safely echo them.
Right. It's not that at all. The brain trust, as it's defined by architects like Ed Catmull, is described as a lab. It's a dedicated, protected space where you interrogate the current experiment, which is the film, with speed and specificity. The only metric that matters is this working yet?
And in that 1998 crisis, the system really earned its reputation. The brain trust delivered a signal that wasn't just critical, it was genuinely brutal. The conclusion was unavoidable.
The core isn't right. That was the signal. Woody's motivation wasn't compelling. The emotional stakes just weren't high enough.
And here is the hinge moment. This is the piece of the story that really demonstrates the just astonishing power of early, painful truth.
Because of this crystal clear signal, Pixar made a truly dramatic, almost unbelievable decision for a major Hollywood studio. They decided the film needed to be completely rewritten.
We're not talking about reshooting a few scenes here.
No. We're talking about tearing down years of conceptual work and starting over on the core story.
Just think about the organizational courage that demands. To admit that much sunk cost, all that time, the energy, the money, was misdirected, and then to immediately pivot. And they didn't have the luxury of time, right? The deadline was 9 months away.
It was an insane amount of pressure. And the sources highlight this. The story team had to redevelop the entire plot, the emotional arc, the character motivations in one single weekend.
A weekend.
One weekend. They compressed what might normally be years of refinement into just 9 months before the final product had to ship. And that kind of sprint is only possible because they had built a culture where it was structurally and psychologically safe to say, this isn't good enough yet.
And that's the secret, isn't it? It's not some magic idea they found in the rewrite.
Yeah.
It's the mechanism. It's the system that made the harsh truth land safely in the first place, which then allowed them to iterate. And that brings us to the core principle here. Candor without coercion.
Exactly. Pixar realized that if you want that razor-sharp feedback, you have to avoid the kind of political dynamic that makes people either defensively hostile or, blindly compliant.
So how did they do it?
Ed Catmull designed 2 brilliant structural features to achieve this delicate balance. And these are things we should all try to replicate.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first rule he insisted upon was that the brain trust must be made of peers, not judges. The people giving the feedback are all highly accomplished directors, writers, story artists, people who have been through the process themselves.
So they have that craft empathy. They know how hard the job is.
That's critical. It changes the language. When a peer says this scene isn't working, it's not coming down as an executive command. It's advice from someone who respects the difficulty of what you're doing. It means the group's focus is on the problem and the work, not the failure of the individual.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second point, you said it's the most vital one.
It is. It's the one that guarantees safety. The brain trust has no authority.
No authority.
None. The director of the project does not have to obey any specific suggestion. The group exists entirely to increase the quality of the director's thinking, to sharpen their diagnostic process, not to win arguments or enforce compliance.
Wow. That structural limitation solves that universal problem we mentioned, right? If feedback feels like a command, people just stop listening critically.
They do. If a CEO gives a note, the person receiving it will spend all their energy figuring out how to comply, not whether the note is actually correct.
So by removing that enforcement power,
the brain trust is forced to give feedback that is so true, so specific, and so insightful that the director chooses to adopt it. They adopt it because they realize it will improve their own vision.
But doesn't that risk chaos? I mean, if the director is allowed to just ignore this group of brilliant people, what stops them from going rogue or just defending their own ego?
That's a great critical question, and it really speaks to the high emotional maturity that's required. What prevents the chaos is the shared understanding of the world-class quality and the deep respect among the peers.
So it's a social contract.
It's a social contract, exactly. The contract is simple. If you bring your half-finished work to a group of your brilliant peers and they unanimously tell you the foundation is cracked, ignoring them doesn't just damage the film, it damages your standing with the people you respect most.
So the coercion isn't hierarchical, it's professional.
Precisely. Catmull's maxim summarizes it all perfectly.
Uh-huh.
Candor is the key to collaborating effectively. Lack of candor leads to dysfunctional environments. Candor is treated as a cultural asset, It's essential to avoiding what he calls dysfunctional politeness.
Dysfunctional politeness, that slow, vague approval that ultimately leads to a slow, vague failure.
You got it.
So how do we apply this principle of candor without coercion, say, in a non-animation context, like software development or marketing strategy? How do we build this truth pipeline ourselves?
Well, we need tools that force specificity and reduce the temperature of those ego battles. So the first tactical suggestion, like we just discussed, is to always design no authority feedback.
Make the owner of the project the final decision maker.
Always. The panel or your brain trust is delivering information and diagnosis, not a directive. And that links to the second tool, which is subtly transformative. Ask for diagnosis, not solutions.
Why is that distinction so important?
Because if you ask a group of highly intelligent people, what should I do to fix this?
Yeah.
You immediately trigger ego battles. Everyone has a different pet theory for the fix. You'll spend the whole meeting defending or comparing solutions.
But if you shift the question...
If you shift it to what's not working, where exactly did the story break, you bypass the ego and you trigger clarity. Diagnosis is less personally threatening than prescribing a solution. A solution is a value judgment. A diagnosis is a shared investigation into reality.
And we also have to ban those vague judgments, the I like it or I don't like it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a forcing function to close the signal gap. You have to force specificity. For example, in a strategy review, you require specifics like, where exactly did our argument get logically confused? What felt untrue about the projected market behavior?
That kind of requirement just shortens the distance to reality by eliminating the ambiguity where problems love to hide.
Right. If feedback can slip, it will slip. So schedule a loop, make it predictable, weekly or biweekly. And then finally, you have to close the loop publicly. After you get that painful truth, summarize it. Say, here's what I'm changing based on your input, here's what I'm choosing not to change, and critically, why I'm making those choices.
So that public declaration transforms raw feedback into organizational trust. It reinforces that you heard the truth and acted responsibly on it, even if you didn't follow every single suggestion.
Exactly. So the one-line charge for this segment.
Go for it.
Feedback that feels safe but useless is just applause in disguise. To be useful, it must be brutal, but structurally safe.
Okay, so we're moving now from the high-stakes, highly personal world of creative development to the seemingly rigid, impersonal world of the factory floor. This is where a totally different kind of truth pipeline was engineered. We're talking about Toyota City, Japan, in the 1950s.
Yeah, and this jump really highlights how universal these principles of truth pipelines are. In almost all global manufacturing environments of the mid-20th century, the rule was simple, it was absolute, and it was enforced by fear.
Never stop the line.
Never stop the line. Productivity was measured by uptime. Stoppages were the enemy. The hero was often the person who quietly spotted a flaw, concealed it, and just pushed the problem through to be dealt with later, or worse, concealed forever.
And then Toyota introduced what must have looked, completely insane to contemporary manufacturing experts, the add-on cord.
It must have. They empowered the ordinary line worker, the person closest to the raw material in the emerging product, to pull this cord whenever they noticed a misaligned part, a bad weld, anything that felt wrong with the process.
And pulling that cord, it has immediate consequences.
Immediate. The entire assembly line slows down or it stops right away. This mechanism is a physical, unignorable feedback loop designed to prioritize immediate resolution, not later blame or concealment.
Right. Contrast that with the traditional approach, where that misaligned part is just forced through.
And it creates a hidden defect that might lead to a warranty claim or a total failure 6 months later, costing 10 times more to fix. In the Toyota production system, the cord is pulled, lights flash, sometimes music plays, and supervisors and teammates converge instantly. They swarm the problem.
And the sole goal is what?
Immediate diagnosis and correction. That's it.
The sources highlight the terrifying reality of implementing this, though. At first, the line didn't run smoothly at all. It ran in spurts and stops.
It looked wildly inefficient to outsiders. It looked like the factory was regressing because all these problems were suddenly visible and frequent rather than being concealed inside inventory or finished goods.
And that's the real crux of the cultural friction, isn't it? Progress is usually defined as smoothness.
But Toyota's definition was fundamentally inverted. For them, the visibility of problems is the highest form of learning. Every single stop is a data point. It's a mandatory pause for learning. Every swarm creates this shared, contextual, real-time understanding, and every fix can be standardized and immediately prevent that problem from happening again.
But I have to push back a little here. In a high-pressure environment, How do you prevent abuse? What stops a worker from pulling the cord over something trivial just to get a break or maybe to get back at a supervisor? I mean, if you give junior staff the power to halt multi-million-dollar production lines, don't you invite a cry wolf syndrome?
That is the essential counterargument, and the answer lies in the system's design and the cultural reinforcement, not just in the cord itself.
Okay.
First, abuse is minimized because the stop isn't a break. It triggers that immediate swarm protocol where the person who pulled the cord is front and center. It creates a social pressure to find a genuine, actionable problem.
This is not a free pass.
Not at all. And second, the system measures recurrence. If the same problem causes a stop repeatedly, the focus shifts immediately to the supervisor or the engineer who failed to standardize the fix. The system is designed to punish repeated process failure, not the initial act of reporting.
Ah, so it's the expectation of a standardized permanent fix that enforces accountability, not the act of pulling the cord itself.
Precisely. And this speaks directly to the philosophy of Taiichi Ono, the architect of the whole system. His core philosophy was that improvement is the daily habit of seeing waste, or muda, and removing it. His ultimate goal wasn't just building cars, it was reducing the total timeline from order to cash by eliminating all that non-value added waste. The Andon system forces that waste into the light.
So the Andon cord is the physical mechanism that puts teeth into the feedback loop. Let's detail the 4 critical gaps that this system closes, because I think they are universal to any organization trying to improve.
Okay. First is the signal cap. As we noted, problems become visible immediately. Not in a monthly meeting, not in a year-end report, but right at the point of creation.
Second gap.
The time gap. Issues are addressed when the context is fresh, literally within seconds of occurring. And fixes are cheapest and most accurate when they happen right at the point of occurrence.
Then you have the ownership gap. And this is so vital for the democratization of truth. The system empowers the person closest to the work, the line worker, the most junior engineer, the admin assistant, to trigger the loop.
It allows truth to flow horizontally and from the bottom up. And finally, the learning gap. The fix isn't treated as a local one-off. The team doesn't just clear the immediate symptom. They adjust the process so the problem doesn't return. They turn that learning into a permanent win, standardized across the entire operation.
So applying this to knowledge work, where we don't have a physical assembly line, the challenge is defining what constitutes a stop.
Exactly. You need to define your stop conditions in advance. What errors or risks must halt progress? Is it a critical security flaw? A 5% deviation from a quality metric? Anything that risks a customer promise has to be codified as a stop condition.
And when that condition is hit, you run your own digital equivalent of the swarm protocol, a 10-minute huddle.
A 10-minute huddle. And you have to answer 3 core questions. What happened? What's the smallest, fastest fix we can implement to get the process moving safely again? And most critically, what will prevent this from recurring?
And that prevention part requires us to move past the superficial answers. This is where we bring in that classic Toyota tool, the 5 whys. This is how you really close the learning gap. Don't stop at the surface. You can't stop at human error.
You have to drill down maybe 5 layers to find the true system cause that made the error likely in the first place. Let's walk through a quick example, say in a non-manufacturing context, like a delayed financial report that causes a budgeting issue.
Okay.
So the problem, the Q3 budget report was submitted 2 weeks late. Why 1? Well, the analyst, let's call her Sarah, was late compiling the data. That's the surface level human error.
Right, that's where most investigations would stop. Blame Sarah.
Exactly. But we ask, why 2? Why was Sarah late? Because she had to manually cross-reference data from 2 systems that weren't integrated. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Why 3? Why are those systems not integrated? Because the integration project was deprioritized last quarter. Why 4? Why was that project deprioritized? Because leadership was focused solely on a short-term marketing campaign deadline. And finally, why 5? Why is our process designed to consistently prioritize short-term revenue spikes over long-term data infrastructure health?
And then boom, there it is.
There's the systemic cause, a flawed leadership metric or organizational strategy. You see how you instantly move from blaming Sarah to identifying a fundamental flaw in the company's prioritization metrics.
That is the genius of the 5 whys, coupled with that Andon cord philosophy. If you never stop the line to ask those whys, the line will eventually stop you, probably catastrophically.
That's it. The takeaway here is so simple. Improvement starts when you are disciplined enough to pause and inspect the pain.
We are shifting now from these deeply engineered production systems to the raw issue of corporate culture and how leaders incentivize the speed of truth. And this story about Alcoa and Paul O'Neill in 1987 is just a perfect case study in rewiring organizational incentives to prioritize reality.
Yeah, that's a great one. So New York City, October 1987, O'Neill takes over Alcoa, the massive aluminum company. And shareholders and Wall Street analysts are all expecting the usual, right? Talk about margins, market share, forecasts.
It's a standard CEO playbook.
The standard playbook. Instead, O'Neill gets up and immediately announces that worker safety would be the single most important metric, the indicator of all progress.
And this was met with skepticism, right? Wall Street looked at him like he was completely out of touch with the financial realities of running a massive corporation.
Complete and total skepticism.
Yeah.
But O'Neill argued a really powerful point. Safety was the ultimate proxy for operational excellence. If you could achieve zero preventable injuries, it proved you had the attention to detail, the communication channels, and the systemic discipline necessary to get everything else right.
Including quality, cost reduction, margins.
All of it. You can't make perfect aluminum if you can't get your process right enough to keep people from losing fingers. It's that simple.
But as we've established, the focus alone isn't enough. The mechanism is the key.
Right. And O'Neill demanded a radical and invasive real-time safety reporting system. Facilities had to report every single incident, any injury, even minor ones, within 24 hours. And that report had to include the root cause analysis and the specific corrective actions taken to ensure it never happens again.
This is a perfect example of engineering speed into that truth pipeline. Bad news had to travel faster than ever before.
It was designed to expose problems when the evidence was fresh and the fix was still feasible, preventing that toxic inertia of concealment. He didn't just ask for data. He required diagnosis and an action plan within 24 hours.
But again, in a traditional hierarchical corporate setting, the natural incentive is to bury bad news. I mean, if you report an incident, your facility looks bad, your bonus is jeopardized, you might even lose your job. How did O'Neill overcome that deep-seated fear that reporting problems is a career-limiting move?
That's the billion-dollar question. And it brings us right to the hinge moment, the culture test that validated his entire system. The sources recount an executive at one facility who, under pressure, tried to keep a serious accident quiet.
A clear attempt to block the mandated feedback loop.
Exactly, to protect his unit's performance metrics.
And O'Neill found out about the concealment, so what was the fallout?
That cover-up was the true threat to the entire organizational structure O'Neill was trying to build. If he tolerated it, if the executive just got a slap on the wrist, the message would go out instantly across the company. Hide the problems to protect your career.
And the whole safety focus, the entire new culture, would just become performative theater.
It would be over. So he had to be ruthless to save the system itself. He investigated the incident, and he fired the executive involved in the cover-up. The message resonated across the entire massive organization, making the rule totally unambiguous. The career-limiting move was not reporting the incident, which was treated as data. The career-limiting move was blocking the feedback loop.
The organization learned, through dramatic action, you can bring me problems, but you can't bury them.
And that single act just wired the organization with a new definition of trust. The fear of embarrassment, which is the greatest killer of organizational truth, was replaced by the fear of concealment, which O'Neill had defined as sabotage.
The core principle here seems to be that the loop is only as strong as the organization's relationship with embarrassment.
That's it. Most groups default to protecting the line. They protect the schedule, they protect the boss's mood, they protect their own narrative. And this creates a hidden backlog of defects and lies. O'Neill flipped the incentives completely, making transparency the path to career longevity.
So his feedback loop was speed, that 24-hour rule, plus safety, the metric equals truth.
And truth plus action equals improvement. It's a powerful equation.
So for the listener, this means implementing some hard and fast speed rules for bad news in your own domain. Maybe you set a 24-hour rule for one specific kind of defect, late deliverables, or key performance indicators that drop below a threshold.
Yes, but the report has to be high quality.
Yeah.
It has to include that trifecta. What happened? Why did our system allow it? And what is the specific next step? And crucially, you have to institutionalize the rule. Punish concealment, not imperfection.
Make it explicit that mistakes are data you can learn from, and that anyone concealing data is committing an organizational crime.
And that requires leadership to publicly accept the short-term pain of surfacing those mistakes. And you can use positive reinforcement too. I really like the tactic of rewarding early escalation. Publicly thank the first person who surfaces an issue before it spreads.
Because you're rewarding the act of reporting and protecting the pipeline, not the absence of error.
Exactly. If you can make bad news travel fast, you save time, money, and organizational trust. If bad news has to climb a ladder, stopping on every rung for approval or scrubbing, it dies on the stairs. That's the clear, enduring maxim from the Alcoa story.
All right, so we've covered structural candor, process empowerment, and cultural incentives. We shift now to the critical issue of signal design and the power of data visualization. We're going way back to 1854, the Crimean War, and Florence Nightingale at the Scutari Barracks Hospital near Constantinople.
This scenario presents, I think, the ultimate challenge for a truth pipeline. You have massive suffering that's dispersed across time and geography, which makes it abstracted very easy for distant decision makers to just ignore.
And the scene was just appalling. Soldiers were dying, but not primarily from their battlefield wounds.
No, they were dying from disease, dysentery, and infection, all caused by the systematically lethal, unsanitary conditions of the camp hospitals.
And the military bureaucracy could easily dismiss this. They could just say, it's the inevitable cost of war. The suffering was spread out, it was quiet, and not dramatically visible like a charge on a hill. Dispersed suffering is the silent killer in any organization.
It really is. It's the accumulated small failures that leadership never aggregates into one single shocking truth. But Nightingale instinctively understood that compassion alone wouldn't win the day. She needed undeniable facts.
Her instinct wasn't just to increase supplies or staff.
No, it was rigorous measurement. She gathered and organized meticulous data on mortality rates and, critically, the cause of death, separating battlefield injuries from preventable diseases. She was building a reliable signal from a mountain of human tragedy.
But reliable data alone isn't enough, is it? Especially when you're dealing with a bureaucratic or political leadership. You need a way to translate that signal into immediate, unavoidable action.
Exactly. And this is where she designed a truly persuasive interface for her signal. This is the moment we introduce her famous polar area diagram, often referred to as the coxcomb chart.
And this was not just a table of statistics.
Far from it. It was a visual argument. It dramatized the needless deaths that were tied to unsanitary conditions. It made the invisible killer, the slow march of disease, visible, sudden, and undeniable to non-experts.
Can you tell us more about the design? I mean, why was the coxcomb chart so revolutionary and so effective compared to just a simple table of numbers?
Well, the beauty of the coxcomb was its clarity and its emotional impact. It divided the year into wedges, and the size of each colored wedge represented the number of deaths. And crucially, she used different colors for different causes of death.
So you could see it at a glance.
At a glance. The large blue wedges, which represented deaths from preventable disease, they just dwarfed the small red wedges for combat wounds. It immediately and dramatically showed that the system of care was killing exponentially more men than the enemy was. It bypasses the need for technical statistical literacy. It's an instant, visceral argument.
It forces cognitive closure.
Exactly. Nightingale understood the brutal constraint of her audience. The people who had the authority to implement massive, costly reforms, the members of parliament, the entrenched military leadership, they lacked the time, the technical training, and the emotional connection to the wards.
So once she returned from the Crimea, her work was focused entirely on targeting those decision makers.
That's right. The source material notes that once her evidence was shaped into this compelling, undeniable signal, the question shifted entirely. It was no longer, are things bad, or are you sure the numbers are right?
The question became,
will you act now that you can see the truth in this undeniable graphic format?
That is the core principle, engineering a decision trigger. A successful truth pipeline at this level needs 3 synchronized components.
It does. A reliable, meticulously collected signal, that was her data, a persuasive, simplified interface, the coxcomb chart, and a target with the authority to initiate reform parliament. Data without meaning is inert trivia, meaning that's inaccessible or vague is just easily dismissed.
I love how her worldview elevates statistics beyond mere calculation. She has that famous quote that captures it.
To understand God's thoughts, we must study statistics, for these are the measure of his purpose. For her, statistics were not cold numbers. They were a moral imperative, a way to understand the true consequence of human actions or, inactions.
The organizational goal, therefore, is not just data collection.
No, it's transforming data into a truth so clear that the next necessary steps, the reform, become undeniable. You're engineering that single, unavoidable decision moment.
So how do we apply this in our own busy, data-saturated world? We need to build our own Nightingale chart. Pick one critical outcome, customer retention, project defects, internal response time, and visualize it so clearly that a busy leader can grasp the situation in 30 seconds.
That's the test. If it takes 5 minutes to explain the chart, you failed. And don't just track the totals, you have to separate noise from actionable causes.
Track categories that point directly to an intervention.
Right. Did the high churn rate happen because of a problem with a new product feature, which is actionable? Or was it because of a cyclical market shift, which is noise? You need categories that inform specific changes to the process.
And finally, you create a concise, almost irresistible reform packet. One page. The undeniable visual chart. The key insight that the visual provides: 75% of our failures are preventable, and the first specific corrective action you recommend.
Give the decision maker everything they need to say, yes, authorize this change. When truth is visually compelling, excuses lose their shelter. That's the lasting power of data visualization in the truth pipeline. Okay, our final loop takes us into the modern high-stakes environment where genius meets diligence. Critical care medicine, specifically the work of Dr. Peter Pronovost at Johns Hopkins in the early 2000s. And this really focuses on closing that gap between intention, what we know we should do, and execution, what we actually do every single time.
Right. And Pronovost was confronting a quiet, devastating killer, preventable bloodstream infections from central venous catheters, often called central lines. This is a routine life-saving procedure, but the complexity and speed of the ICU meant that crucial infection control steps were often skipped, leading to thousands of preventable deaths every year.
The infection rates showed that execution was just wildly unreliable, even among expert clinicians. But Pronovost refused to accept the prevailing fatalism, that idea that infections are inevitable in an ICU. He treated it as a systems failure and developed an offensively simple 5-step checklist for inserting central lines.
And these were all basic, evidence-based actions, nothing new or revolutionary.
No, nothing technically revolutionary. Rigorous hand hygiene, using full sterile barriers, proper antiseptic skin prep, things like that.
And the sources are so clear that the profound impact came not just from the list itself, but because the checklist was used as a lever for a cultural shift. It was fundamentally about granting permission to speak up.
Absolutely. This is the sociological mechanism that makes the truth flow up the hierarchy. In a high-status environment like an ICU, a junior nurse often hesitates to challenge a senior physician who may be fatigued or distracted, even if they see a crucial step being skipped.
That professional hierarchy just blocks the real-time feedback loop.
It does. But the genius of the checklist is that it externalizes the standard. It makes the conversation all of us versus the process, not you, the nurse, versus me, the high-status doctor.
The checklist acts as the objective, external voice of truth, leveling the field.
It makes it socially safe and even mandatory for the process witness, the nurse, to say, without fear of retribution, Dr. Smith, we must pause. Step 3 has not been completed. It's not a personal affront. It's an adherence to the shared system that's designed for patient safety.
And this wasn't just a local success, was it? This was scaled up dramatically through the Keystone ICU project in Michigan. They deployed the simple protocol across ICUs statewide.
And this is where the measurement closes the loop. It wasn't just do a checklist and hope. They combined the standardized 5 steps with intensive measurement and feedback of the infection rates. If infection rates were stable, they continued. If they crept up, they investigated the process failure.
So it's that critical cycle. Standard, checklist, observe, measure, report, adjust, repeat. The continuous measurement and feedback ensured that the dramatic reductions, which saved hundreds of lives, weren't just a flash of initial enthusiasm. They were sustained over time, creating reliable excellence.
And this demonstrates the principle of standardized reliability. A loop needs a stable standard, the simple checklist so you know when you're deviating, and a social mechanism, the permission to speak up so that deviation is caught in real time.
Atul Gawande, who helped popularize this work, summed up the philosophy so perfectly. Better is possible. It does not take genius. It takes diligence. It takes a willingness to be humble and ask, where did we fail to execute the known standard?
Right. The checklist ruthlessly closes that gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it every single time. And the checklist, combined with the permission mechanism, creates a necessary feedback channel that flows up the hierarchy. It shifts the culture from one that celebrates heroic improvisation.
The doctor who swoops in and saves the day by cutting corners.
Right, to one that rewards repeatable, systematic reliability. Heroism is very often a symptom of systems failure. Reliability is the hallmark of success.
So, for our listeners in knowledge work, the core tactic is to create a 5-step standard for one critical process where mistakes are costly. This isn't a 50-page manual.
No, it's just a few non-negotiable steps that prevent the worst failure. For a major client presentation, maybe it's 1. Confirm data source integrity. 2. Verify all internal legal sign-offs. 3. Run the presentation by a critical objective peer. 4. Check for consistent messaging. 5. Confirm the meeting's objective with the client an hour before. Something like that.
And then you assign a process witness, someone explicitly empowered, and it should not be the boss, to halt progress by saying, pause step 3 didn't happen.
That person is responsible for ensuring the loop runs faithfully, protecting the standard from the pressure of the deadline. And finally, you must run a weekly retrofit review. This is where you close the loop.
And you ask not who was responsible for the mistake, but where did we drift and what process friction tempted us to skip the standardized step.
Exactly. Don't blame the person. Fix the friction in the process. A checklist isn't about unnecessary control. It's a necessary, repeatable conversation with reality.
That was a powerful deep dive into 5 powerful systems that engineered truth, rather than just asking for it into their daily operations. Let's maybe synthesize those core ingredients of an effective feedback loop, pulling them from these incredibly diverse case studies.
I think we saw that the loops rely fundamentally on 5 core pillars. First, psychological safety, which we saw at Pixar and Alcoa, to ensure truth is delivered without career risk.
Right. Then there was speed and empowerment from the Toyota Andon to ensure the person closest to the problem can halt progress and swarm a solution immediately.
Then data visualization from Nightingale to transform abstract suffering or scattered data into an undeniable persuasive signal that triggers decision makers.
Fourth was standardization from the Keystone Checklist to define objective targets and allow the process, rather than the hierarchy, to speak for itself.
And across all of them, the ruthless focus on system, not ego.
If the problem is visible, it can be fixed. If the problem is concealed, it festers. So what microsteps can our listeners take right now to begin building their own truth pipeline?
Okay, so today, schedule one brain trust meeting for a work in progress and explicitly communicate the rule in advance. No authority, my call. Your job is pure, unvarnished diagnosis and truth.
And for your most frustrating process, write down 3 concrete stop conditions for a recurring defect this week. The next time one is met, you have to pause and swarm for 10 minutes.
For visibility, build a one-page green, yellow, red dashboard for 5 to 10 critical items, and make sure that those who report red, honestly, are publicly rewarded for their transparency.
And finally, create a simple 5-step checklist for a high-cost mistake in your work and assign a temporary process witness for the first trial run next week.
And remember the maxim that governs the health of all these systems, the one we took from the Alcoa experience. If bad news has to climb a ladder, it dies on the stairs. You must design systems that make bad news travel horizontally and immediately.
The ultimate lesson here seems to be that building a robust truth pipeline is not an optional expense or a luxury. It is the fundamental infrastructure for achieving excellence in any field. The key to quality isn't working harder, it's building the mechanism that forces you to face reality sooner.
And here's the provocative thought for you to mull over after this deep dive. If your work is judged solely by its final polished appearance, are you currently incentivized to hide the necessary messiness, the necessary mistakes, and the difficult iterations of the process? How can you redefine success in your environment so that running the loop, the iterative, courageous process of seeking and acting on objective truth, becomes your most celebrated and rewarded metric?